Hello, hello, hello. This is Dan Hayes and the Dr. Greg Sadler here for Wisdom for Life.
Glad to be here.
So today we have a very apt topic. We are talking about fear and anxiety.
And how to deal with crises as well.
Yeah. So once again, we are here doing a radio show for practical philosophy.
Yeah, so the idea behind this show is that philosophy and ideas, concepts, distinctions, practices from it can be useful for helping people to live a better life. And sometimes living a better life, which sounds very positive, is about how to deal with things that on their face seem and quite often are quite negative. So, we're kicking around the idea about what topic to focus on next after our first show, and we had something in mind, and boom, now we're in a state of emergency. So we thought that we would change it up a bit and talk about something quite topical, which is going to become, I think, evergreen in the sense that we're always going to be dealing with one crisis or another. So it's something good to tackle right away, I think.
Yeah, life is nothing but a series of tests put in front of you, and how you deal with them is going to very strongly impact your day-to-day happiness, your calmness, your tranquility of mind.
Yeah, and we should talk about the idea of crises. In Greek, crisis is sort of a deciding point. It's literally a decision, right? And so a lot of people get into difficult situations like the one we're in right now, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We'll plumb the depths and discuss why people are so afraid, more so than at other times. But crises present us with an opportunity to choose differently, to use them to work upon ourselves. And I know this probably sounds to a lot of listeners in the actual crisis that we're in sort of pie in the sky Pollyannish, but it's not. It's if you want to live a life that's relatively free of fear and where you orient yourself towards what it is that you actually want to do, and the relationships that you want to have and all of those sorts of things, then using this crisis that we're in now, caused by the coronavirus, but a lot of other things as well, is probably a good idea.
And every time that we have a crisis, it is an opportunity to reflect upon how we've done and see how we can move forward in a better way. And I have no doubt that we will eventually weather this particular crisis, and hopefully we can take good stock of the different things and the decisions, the crises that have happened, and figure out better, newer processes and procedures that will help us in the future, just like all of our things that we're trying to talk about here on Wisdom for Life. I'm talking about practical philosophy.
Yeah, and now let me ask you, so we'll make this a little bit more dialogical, taking stock of it, right? Mm-hmm. We might not actually succeed in taking stock of it on a national level, right?
No.
Maybe it leads to some important political changes and programs and realizations, or maybe it doesn't. And but so what do you mean by taking stock? Is it something more individual or something more social but at a lower level than, say, the nation as a whole?
I guess taking stock is at any place where there is a decision to be made. And so obviously it is very useful for an individual. It's useful to take stock each night and think about your decisions that you did that day. Even, you might want to do it more often than even that. But, whenever you have, it's going to be individuals that are put into places of power, that are making these decisions. And it's for them, each person that is making these decisions, to take stock at that level. And sometimes those things affect only one person, and sometimes those things can affect billions.
Okay. So, before we jump into talking about the actual crisis that we're in, which may seem a little dismal, I just had a thought. It strikes me, so we're talking about opportunities, and a lot of this show is about how to implement and understand philosophical practices that will over time make your life better. This is what we call philosophy as a way of life. And I was just thinking that because people right now are maintaining social distancing and also to some degree self-quarantining. Yeah, we're not exactly 6 feet away from each other the way we're supposed to be here, but ideally, we would be a little bit further apart. But there's going to be a lot of people who are staying in their places. They've stockpiled stuff. They're, college classes, for example, are now going online. People are working from home. There's a whole other conversation to be had about the fact that people have been told that they couldn't work from home in the past, and now suddenly it's available for them to do so as an option, and even mandated. But during that time of being stuck at home and avoiding, say, public transport or other things, doesn't that strike you as a really great time to introduce new habits, new routines into one's life? I mean, if you know that you don't have to immediately get out and hop on the bus or do your morning commute or something like that, and you're going to be working from home and you know what the hours for that are going to be, maybe it's the time. You mentioned taking stock of things at night,
Yeah.
That practice, that's a good one, but maybe during the day as well.
Well, you make a good point. Like, a lot of us have a certain morning routine that we have set up, and a lot of times we haven't thought about it. Just like, okay, what are the things that I need to get done right at this exact moment in order to get myself to the place where, the boss isn't going to yell at me for not being there on time, or, my students in your case would be like, where's Professor Sadler?
Yeah. I think a lot of our morning routines are basically, like little crises. Get the stuff done in the morning so we can get out of there and get, wherever we need to be. And like you said, keep the boss from getting angry with us for not being where we're supposed to be, or not doing the thing that we're supposed to do, or looking busy at least.
Looking busy. That is another show altogether.
How to look busy.
If you can, there's many different ways that you can start your morning, and maybe you're like, okay, how do we have a more calm mind in the morning instead of being in this racing setting? And I have the opportunity to experiment with different ways of doing these things, of saying, okay, can I give myself a little bit more time? Do I sit down and meditate, or just think about what's going to happen that day and figure out if there's anything there that will allow me to then have a better day altogether. Yeah,
so meditating is a good way to start the morning, and doing that sort of morning preview, one that's not, let's say, all that internet connected, so you're not checking all the news and seeing what Twitter has to contribute, but rather just sort of rehearsing in your mind, okay, I need to do this, I need to do this. I think another thing that I've often tried to introduce and sometimes succeed for a while, and a lot of people find quite valuable, is devoting a time, maybe half an hour or an hour of reading a particular text, or particular thinker, or particular movement, or something like that. So that could be quite good. But let's talk actually about why waking up in the morning and immediately checking your phone for the latest news during a crisis might not be the best way to begin.
Well,
there could be some cases where it would be, though. Right?
Yeah, if there's pertinent information that you need to know. But if it's a general kind of overall feeling of malaise about what is just going on, especially if you're talking about political things, and you wake up in the morning, you just fill yourself with dread or something because someone that you don't like is doing things that you don't like, that's just going to color your entire day with that. But I wanted to go back because, we're talking about waking up in the morning.
Okay.
And a lot of times it requires time. And so you need to even go back further. And you should be starting your morning routine before you go to bed. Figure out what time that you're going to go to bed in order to make sure that you have the time in order to do all these things that you want to do to make sure that your day in your life goes smooth, or as smooth as possible in this. Yeah,
that's true. So,
world.
That's a good thing to point out is, getting enough sleep which sounds very easy to do, but is often quite difficult in practice, turns out to be important not just for physical health, but also for mental health and being able to follow through on things that we commit to, because we don't have an infinite supply of what people like to call willpower, and the more sleep deprived we are, the worse off we are. So we should talk about the reasons why people are staying up at night, waking up in cold sweats, and worrying about maybe whether they're not sick or not.
I think that fits right into our topic here, which is fear and specifically anxiety.
Yeah, and so, right now we're in the middle of a health crisis, and there'll be other ones after this. We've had other health crises before this, so in talking about this, we're not doing something that's just of the moment, but could be applicable to other cases as well. But what we're in right now, it does seem to be quite bad. And nobody really knows how bad it's going to be, or whether it's all going to blow over. There's lots of people making predictions, but since we're stuck in a strange epistemological position where we don't actually know how many people are infected, and we're now gathering more and more information as time goes on, we can't make accurate predictions. What we do know is that, here in where we're living in Milwaukee, schools are, sending their students home and saying switch to online, which makes sense. A lot of workplaces are doing similar things with working from home. It's pretty rough for people in the restaurant industry because not a lot of people are going there, but they're being told they need to come into work. And same with the retail industry, where people are buying things out of stock, including toilet paper of all things. And there's sort of a sense of, I won't call it generalized panic, but there is a palpable fear in the air, I would say. And then, just a little earlier, we had an actual national state of emergency declared, and we see that it's around the world. There's lots of places that are much worse off than us, and there's some that are doing quite a bit better. So, we can talk about this as being a major crisis. And then it's not just a health crisis, it's also a financial crisis. We saw the stock market take a huge tumble, in part because supply chains have been disrupted. And I mean, what else should we say about this? It's health, it's financial and work and
stress.
Yeah. There, and going back again to like retail and restaurant workers, a lot of them are in quite a difficult situation where they're being told they have to show up for work, and if they don't show up for work, they'll get in trouble. And if they call in sick, they only get so many times to do that. And so, people are being told contradictory things. Everybody should be at home with 2 weeks or a month worth of stockpiled stuff. But, a lot of people don't have the money to stockpile all these groceries, alone the time to go out and compete with everybody else to get these. So it is a time, I think, in which people are afraid.
And it's going to lay bare a lot of the inefficiencies in our system. It's going to show where the cracks are.
Yeah, that's quite true. And some of the fears that people have are, less vital. Let's say. I mean, some people are really afraid that they're going to get sick and they're going to die. If you're immune compromised right now, I can quite understand being quite fearful. And then there's other people who have fears, but they're things like, am I going to get my tuition money back for this class that now may or may not run? And what am I? There's things that are in between, like, am I homeless now that the dorms are closed to students? I'm talking a lot more about educational stuff, in part because that's what I'm seeing from my vantage point. Maybe you should say a few things about what you think are particularly vital and fear-producing for people.
I guess from my vantage point, I see more of the worry about especially if you're hourly working, you're not a salary position, that you're going to have your income stream dry up soon, and then
how do you pay rent?
How do you pay rent? How do you put food on the table? there was a study a couple years ago saying that more than half of Americans couldn't weather a $500 unexpected expense, which seems like this is going to be definitely a $500 expense, especially if you're losing hours, you're losing
very true.
the general day-to-day workings. But I wanted to talk about what is a rational fear and what's an irrational fear here.
Okay, so let's jump into the discussion about fear. There's a lot of different theories of emotion talking about what fear is, and one that you and I have in common is taking the Stoic perspective. And I think the Stoics, they were right in saying that what fear is at its core, and they lumped a lot of things in there under the rubric of fear, phobos in Greek, right? Mm-hmm. The thing that we get phobia from. They thought that it's the sort of perception of something bad that is not yet present. So we don't, when we have something that's bad that's present, we don't feel fear as such. We feel pain, or we feel, some sort of upset. But so fear is an apprehension of something as being bad, being harmful, being damaging to us, and it extends over into other. If you understand it in this broad sense, it's affiliated with other emotions like repugnance or disgust, right? Mm-hmm. Not quite exactly the same thing, but within the same family. Mm-hmm. And so then the question is, should we never fear anything? Well, even the Stoics, who are pretty, when it comes to emotions, most of them they want to wean us away from. They thought there was a rational type of fear, and there were a lot of different subclasses of it that they called caution, eulabeia in Greek. And what's the deciding factor? Whether it's actually rational, and not rational in the sense that we can rationalize it to ourselves, right? So like if I'm we'll get away from crises for a moment and talk about relationships. If I'm chronically afraid that my partner is going to cheat on me, that's not a rational fear, unless they are like a track record cheater or something. In which case that might be a little rational. And you can say, well, why are you with them if you want to, or do you want to be constantly worried about that? But there are some things where it is rational to fear it, not just in the sense of being able to provide a rationalization for it, but we can provide a rational account for why this thing is fearful. If I, if
there's a army outside your door, it is good caution to prepare your troops in order to fend off this army.
I was going to take something like right in front of us. So we're watching cars go back and forth on Center Street here. And if you were to walk me out in the middle of the street and you had a blindfold on me, I should be scared I'm going to get hit, right?
Yes.
That if I'm not, there's something wrong. Given the way people drive around here.
I was just going to say there might be something wrong with Milwaukee and their driving in that regard.
Well, I think you can pick any city. Get that sort of thing.
So this reminds me of the quote by Seneca: "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Or in other words, he who worries suffers twice. And this is the idea of you can be caution and you can take preparation, but if you are in the state of mind of the fearful state of mind before things are apparent that they actually will come to pass, then you are making it more difficult for you to even deal with the situation when it arises.
Right. The worrier, the person who fears when it's not really the right time for that fear, when it's not conducive. I mean, we do have our fear instinct, which is something very basic to us, the way most animals have it, because it helps to keep us alive. But there's so many things that we don't need to fear at this point in time that we do end up worrying and sometimes even obsessing about. And I think during a crisis, in part because, it's not just that we have the fear of the things that the crisis is composed of, say the loss of income or getting sick or what's going to happen to our loved ones or whether it's going to lead to a societal, breakdown in some respect. There's all of that stuff. But then we're so tapped in with social media and it's just the regular media, TV and stuff like that. I mean, think about every doctor's waiting room you go in, there's the TV and it's on, right? Mm-hmm. And it's always on some daytime TV show where talking heads are going back and forth or a bunch of people are sitting around in a circle talking about something. And nowadays they're all going to be talking about the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to be particularly helpful as well. And, all of that falls within the range of what in ancient philosophy they would call the imaginary. It's easy to imagine that bad things are going to happen. We may have good reasons to think that they are, and if we do have good reasons, we don't have to imagine it anymore.
Right.
Now we can say, okay, we project that it will happen, and now we can actually start thinking about what responses can we have to it, if any.
So this comes to kind of the idea of what are we going to be doing in the crisis? And so the first thing is to get the most accurate information that you can. And then, only then, should you make a plan of action based on that information.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be difficult in some places to get accurate information, but here in America, we all have access to the internet, so there's certain basic you might call them almost like community property that we have that we can easily access. And there's probably some sites we should avoid, right?
Oh, yeah. But a couple that are definitely very useful at the moment, there's Johns Hopkins Medical University, and they have a website up at coronavirus.jhu.edu. Has a wealth of information as well as a world map of where the current cases are. CIDRAP, which is the Centers for Infectious Disease and Policy out of the University of Minnesota, has another also wealth of information over at www.cidrap, that's cidrap.umn.edu. And then also, we're here in Milwaukee, and the Milwaukee Health Department has also put out a page. They put out a number of documents that were presented to local businesses in order to help at least give guidelines. And you can find that stuff at city.milwaukee.gov/coronavirus.
And something that just came to mind. So we've got really good, reliable information sources, right? And then we have a whole bunch of other ones that are more sketchy, all the way to the spectrum of essentially sensationalistic, looking for clicks to make money. And what we find in the distinction there is the good sites aren't going to say, oh, everything's great, everything's wonderful. They're going to say, oh, we have a real crisis on our hands, and here's what you ought to do. And they do tell you not to overreact. And then you've got the sites that are like, the sky is falling, and
buy our silver, that will save you.
Well, and buy the silver and get the toilet paper right now. I mean, it's a bit of a digression, but if you think about the fact that toilet paper has become sort of like the prize item, almost like people think it's going to be the currency
it's white gold.
Civilization collapses. Yeah. I mean, it's not that good because you get it wet, and I mean, you think paper towels would be better, but
it's not very durable.
Yeah, it's not a very. Yeah, you're right. So that maybe makes it even more rare, right? over time.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that we would wind up in a situation where somehow that is instead of gold or I don't know, bullets, the way you see in post-apocalyptic scenarios, or gasoline or something like that toilet paper would become the prize.
Maybe
item.
Coronavirus is the harbinger of bidets in the United States.
Well, I've seen people talking about that and buying them, and it could lead to a societal shift. Well, so let's go back to talking about fear. I mean, and rational fear, right? And let's think about the toilet paper thing. So people are going out, and actually some businesses have now instituted
rationing.
limits on you can only buy so many cases of it. And they had a case that I saw on Twitter of somebody going into a Wegmans, buying their the quota, and then coming back in a disguise and getting caught. And so, when that sort of thing happens, that tells you there's something psychological going on, right? And the fear that's driving that, because there are, I think maybe, was it you who mentioned that somebody was buying up toilet paper to sell it, sort of profiteering?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's greed. But I think a lot of people are buying it on the basis of fear. And we won't go into like what the fear actually is too much because we don't want to get scatological here. But
nice word choice.
Yeah. But I think the fear is redoubled because if I know that you're going to go and buy up all the toilet paper available because of your fear, then I have to fear that your fear is going to render me toilet paper less, and then I need to go and buy it myself. So it's almost like a feedback loop where fear builds off of the perception of other fear. And if we think about this in philosophical terms, what we have there is my perception of you perceiving something as bad, whether it really is or not, and your reaction to it produces that same thing in me. It's similar to what we call in philosophy of emotion, emotional contagion, where but it's not quite the same, because this is also based on a semi-rational projection of what you're going to do and then a reaction to that. And so that's the situation that we're in. And we could see hoarding with medicine. Well, I mean, think about what's going on with hand wipes and
hand sanitizers.
Exactly,
I had to make my own last week because I couldn't find any.
Yeah. Stores, some of them are engaging in price gouging, So,
So it feels like there's a lot of anxiety going on in response to this thing.
Yeah, there is. And, so what do we have to say about this from a philosophical perspective? Part of it is, this isn't serving anybody. It's not making anything better. We're not here saying, hey, if you feel fear, stuff it down, tough it out, don't feel it or anything like that. But, what we'd want to be able to do is examine what are we afraid of, and why are we this afraid, and does it serve us to be this afraid? Feeling fear sucks. It's not a fun feeling.
Are you doing it automatically, or are you doing it after you've examined why you're doing it?
Yeah, and not just examined it with like a hasty check the boxes kind of thing, but actually sat down and thought about, does this make sense to be afraid? Like if I find out that the guy who I sat next to on the bus who was coughing into my face tested positive for coronavirus, it's rational to be afraid that I have coronavirus, right? It's not rational for me to think I'm automatically going to die, or I won't be able to get any medical treatment. Those aren't sort of the automatic places that we ought to go, but a lot of people will go there.
Right. Bring up another quote. This one from Marcus Aurelius from the Meditations. It is, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Yeah. So, what do you take that to mean here in this situation? In this situation, like we can have a rational, cautious fear, or however you want to call that, about the situation at hand, and there is a situation that is very rational to be cautious about. Yeah. But to give into that fear, to be anxious, to have those negative emotions be the things that are driving your decisions without any sort of examination, results in you just going along with the flow. You're now the slave of your passions, and not the other way around. And that gets to the practice that we're going to discuss towards the end of the show. Correct. Which is like taking a pause and then examining things. So we'll put that off for just a little bit. But so you're when we're talking about taking precautions, that can be done in rational and irrational ways as well, right? Hoarding is
you could say that hoarding is a rational behavior, but it's not truly rational. It's essentially fear or greed driven, or perhaps even envy driven. The other guy across the way, he's got, all this stuff piled up. I better do it too. And if that's what's driving it, that's not very rational. It leads people to make foolish decisions, and often unjust decisions too. I think one of the things that we're not, we don't talk about that much when it comes to these sort of crises, but is worth reflecting on is if we allow ourselves to be prey to fear, then we're probably not going to live up to the ethical principles that we normally in a non-crisis situation claim to value and to make central to the kinds of people that we are. But we're really being tested when we're thrown into these sorts of crises. That's when we can see whether we're going to treat our neighbors justly or not.
So it kind of makes me think of like the prepper community.
How so?
So they have already stockpiled, so they're not going out and just tearing out everything from the grocery stores. If you're just going there and you're doing it in a very selfish way, then you're not thinking about what is just for your neighbor. But at least for the prepper, he's thought of this ahead of time, and so he's not contributing to the mad rush and the unthinking hoarding there. So
if they are, then they were a bad prepper, right?
Right. So. Yeah. So there was something from Dune that you felt was quite appropriate.
I thought if we're going to talk about fear, now not everybody has read Dune, but it is a very popular science fiction novel, and justly so.
And there's a brand new film coming out as well.
Oh, is there? Okay. Yeah. So, there's this passage very early on in it, and I think a lot of people have seen this in different places. And Paul Atreides is repeating this litany against fear to himself. That's actually quite philosophical, right? And it runs, I'll just read it. It says, "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain." And so, this is an example of a philosophical practice, only it's in a science fiction universe, right?
Right.
And it's actually, we should talk about this, and because this is actually a quite good one.
Well, just because it's fiction and science fiction doesn't mean that it doesn't have value, really applicable value within our real world.
Yeah. So this notion of fear is the mind killer. What does that mean?
So the thing that makes you it's killing your rationality to one thing, and it's also potentially makes you freeze up and not do the things that are necessary when they arise.
Yeah, that's true. We often talk about the flight or fight response, but it's actually nowadays talked about in terms of fight, flight, or freeze response. And I think we could actually add a fourth one, because that's the third one, to it. And we could say flight, fight, what did I just say? Freeze, or oscillate between things and sort of dither and not get anything done, which I suppose is its own weird way of freezing, but it's like a freezing in motion, and none of those by themselves are necessarily productive. There are some situations where we do need to flee,
Right.
In self-defense, a good instructor will not say, "Oh, somebody's got a knife. Yeah, punch him in the face," or something like that. They'll say, "Try to get out of there as quick as you can." Right? That makes sense. Fight, sometimes you have to do that, and freezing sometimes could even be the thing to do. If like taking pause was being done instead of dithering, that could be a good thing as well, right? But yeah, so the mind killer, that's a good way to call it. And then what does it mean to allow fear to pass over you and through you, and then let it go on so that there's nothing except you? So what does that mean?
This is kind of a preview of coming events. This is part of our practice for the day, which is to take a moment. And so, to a certain extent, it is you're going to feel fear. This emotion will arise at you like a sneeze. You're not choosing; it just kind of comes. And when it comes, you need to experience it and let it pass.
What if it doesn't go away when you let it pass, though? Because there are a lot of people who have, you can call it fearful habits. They've been worrying about something for a long time. Like, let's use getting sick. There are people who are, not necessarily obsessive about it, but it's in the back of their mind. Say they're immune compromised, or they've had a lot of sickness in their family, or they know that the people around them aren't washing their hands like you'd want them to, right? People around them are coughing. So they confront their fear. They look at it and, allow it to pass over them. And then they look behind it and it's still there. Right? What do they do then?
Let's see. We should try to reevaluate why we're fearing in the first place, I guess, to take a little bit of a moment of mindfulness and try to maybe examine the way that our mind is processing at the moment. Yeah. You have a different idea?
Well, I was thinking that's good. And then, like analyzing, okay, what am I actually afraid of here? And maybe talking it out with somebody can help sometimes. But what if, what if we were to say, okay, I'm going to be afraid. That's where I am right now. Maybe a year from now in a similar situation with working on stuff, I won't be. But right now I am. And I'm not going to drastically change that in the next 2 weeks that I'm supposed to be, self-isolating or something like that, while we're figuring out what's going on with this virus and all the containment efforts and stuff like that. You can still do the right thing for yourself and for others while you're feeling fear. It requires a choice to, while you're feeling it, not allow it to run the show. Right. And so it could be okay that ideally it's better if you're not afraid all the time of something that you don't need to be afraid of, or not afraid to the same level, right?
I guess this returns back to Socrates' charioteer, or is that Plato?
Well, it's Plato. So how do you see that figuring in the Phaedrus metaphor?
Yeah, it's the charioteer is the one that is reining in our desires, both negative and positive.
Oh yeah. And you always have the desires dragging you around, but you have a choice of what you do with it, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's actually a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
So
what's the end of this? And I look back.
Well, I look back, and he says there's nothing. So there's just me. And ideally that would be what happens to us, but I'm not, a Bene Gesserit, or Paul Atreides in training, and when you have other, here's another dimension to it. When you have other people in your life, the way most of us do, like I think about my kids, and fortunately it seems like this virus is not doing too much to kids, but, I think about what their school's doing and how they're packed in there with all these other kids and
turning into little vectors.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think, okay, how are the people that I love or care about or in some way are connected with, how are they going to be rendered vulnerable to this? I might say, well, it's not that big of a deal for me. I should actually think it's a big deal for me because I'm, pushing 50. But maybe I'm less fearful about that, but I might be more fearful for those I'm connected with. Or I think about my students and how disconcerting this must be for them to be told, hey, we're moving everything online. And, I'm used to teaching online, but I know a lot of my fellow instructors are not. And so they're anxious about it. And I think their students are anxious about it. How is all this stuff going to work out? They're not particularly resilient, I would say. And so I feel, a sense of worry about them. But, how can the key is to not allow that to keep me from doing the things that I need to do, like shifting the class online and being there to provide sort of a steady, hand at the helm for the class and doing all those sorts of things.
Well, this has been a lovely conversation, our discussion, but we do have a question.
Well, and the question is going to be basically leading us further along in this conversation. And so the question stems from worries about the current virus. It says, I'm worried about the new coronavirus. They say it's a pandemic and that up to 70% of the world's population may eventually get it. There's already cases here in my home state. I don't want to get sick or have my family get sick. How can I stay safe? And, a lot of the answer to that is provided in those things that we were talking about earlier, the reliable information sites, right? How can I stay safe? That's not something that I think we need to answer, but I don't want to get sick or have my family get sick, and the idea about there being 70%, these projections that 70% of us are going to get it. It's not saying 70% of us are going to die or 70% of us are going to get really, really sick. That's a projection about the population in a very broad sense, right? And so we want to, when we hear those figures, or when we're looking at the current figures, and they're like, there's more cases in France, there's more cases in Iran, there's more cases in even Seattle. We don't want to allow those things to get blown out of proportion in our minds, and it's very easy for that to happen, right?
Right.
So that's something we want to be on guard against, I think.
To let our minds take us to a place where is not useful information and it's not useful state to be in.
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing that we can use as a criterion.
So
the usefulness, right?
Yeah. Here's a quote from the poem "If" by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, if you can meet triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. So this is, a little bit of stiff upper lipness.
Yeah.
But it is, it is useful that there is a thing that is almost titanic in nature that is bearing down upon us, and it can be a little bit overwhelming, but there is a need, a bit of courage. Maybe we can go into Aristotle here and the golden mean about what is required of us in the moment, and regardless of the odds and the chances that are out there, to do the right thing, to come about this in a just manner. So if we're going to go to Aristotle, we have this idea of the golden mean and what it is to be courageous. And he puts on a spectrum between that person who cowers while all the rest of the city are out fighting and defending it from an invader, versus that one guy who runs out away from the group and right into a group of, maybe 400 enemy soldiers.
Yeah, for the sake of glory or something like that. Yeah.
And so that's recklessness.
Yeah.
And that golden mean of sitting there and doing what you need to do, but don't just throw it all away.
Yeah, and there is a cognitive component to Aristotle's discussion of courage as well. He talks about the courageous person does fear, but they fear, things that it makes sense to fear. So the things that people naturally find quite fear-inducing, like, if a tornado's bearing down in you, it makes perfect sense to be filled with fear. But you could still actually get the children into the cinder block area where they're likely to survive or something like that, even though you're filled with fear. You don't allow it to paralyze you.
This kind of brings up our last week's premeditatum malorum.
Oh, yeah.
Ways to deal with fear. There's going to be fearful situations in your life, and if you have already thought about what those types of things could be and have thought of at least some plans how you should be dealing with those interactions. It allows you to more easily find a solution to that fearful situation.
Yeah, and last week we talked about it. So we used the term premeditatio malorum, which is Latin term meaning sort of thinking ahead about bad things that could happen. And last week we called it negative visualization. And so, those are essentially, interchangeable. And what do? Well, you can do it ahead of time, but we can also do it in a crisis that we're in. Mm-hmm. And we can think about, so let's say you start coughing, right? And you're like, oh, it's a dry cough, and I feel like I've got a fever. And now you start feeling a sense of fear growing within you, maybe even a sense of panic or a sense of serious anxiety. You can say to yourself, okay, what is the worst case scenario? I get really, really sick. I'm going to die. They're not going to have a respirator for me because it's been taken somewhere else and all of that. And then you can think to yourself, okay, what's going to happen because of that, right? It's, in a way, it's sort of like thinking about cause and effect beyond just the thing that tends to hold our attention and captivate us. We place it in another context. And, odds are you're probably not going to die.
Right.
And, okay, you might get really sick, and maybe you're going to lose your job. And because of that, you're not going to be able to pay the rent for that month. And that's pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the end of the world, and it is remediable, and there probably are some things that you can appeal to or find some resources.
Kind of comes to another quote that I have prepared for this one, which is, "It is not the things that disturb men, but their judgments about them. For example, death is nothing catastrophic, or else Socrates too would have thought so. Rather, the judgment that death is catastrophic. This is the catastrophic thing." So this is by Epictetus.
Yeah, and that's that saying. I mean, you could say, well, what would Socrates say, right? That's sort of like the WWJD thing.
Right.
But you could do that with all sorts of others. What would Marcus Aurelius say, or what would Aristotle say? And there's the sort of like, well, the great sage tells us that part to it. But there's also the fact that, hey, if they could do it, we could do it. There's nothing absolutely necessary about us reacting in the way that we do, even though we tell ourselves, I have to be fearful. Or not just fearful. I have to be fearful in this way, and then do these actions like going out and getting as much toilet paper as possible and not allowing there to be toilet paper for others.
Yeah, we don't want to fall into the fallacy of authority here when you're making this decision, but definitely if you look at it as a roadmap of these people have been able to do it and be calm and wise about it, then that allows us to... There's precedent.
That's a good way to put it. They're almost like what we call pathfinders, right?
You're right.
They forge a road that we can then travel on ourselves if we choose to, and that's part of it. We have to actually choose to do things that way.
Oh, and I just wanted to say, because I did bring up the fallacy from authority. Fallacy from authority is a logical fallacy. Doesn't mean that the conclusion is incorrect, but the way that you get to the conclusion is incorrect. And the incorrect conclusion, or the way that's incorrect, is that just because someone in authority says something does not mean that that is the correct thing.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. And it doesn't mean that we have to reject all authority as well.
Right. Yeah, we don't want to say like, all the medical professionals say that we should wash our hands. I'm like, no, I don't care about those authority. I'll not wash my hands. We should
you don't have to prove it to yourself entirely. There's some things that we can take on trust and should take on trust. Actually, that's another thing where we could bring up Epictetus as well. He, the Stoics are known for like establishing what the thing they're going to do is, and then sticking with it, right? And like persevering. And there's a thing in Epictetus' discourses where he's confronted with a guy who has decided to starve himself to death. And Epictetus goes up to him and he says, "What's wrong with you?" And the guy is like, "Hey, I made a decision. I'm sticking with it." And Epictetus says, listen, you dummy, that's not stoicism. That, just sticking with a stupid decision, that's not actually the thing to do. You have to have a good, rational decision, and then you stick with it. It's not, he calls it just stubbornness or obstinacy is how it's often translated. Aristotle actually has a discussion of that too in the Nicomachean Ethics, when he's talking about people who follow through on things that they've decided to do. And following through is generally good, but not if you picked something stupid to follow through on.
Right.
Then you're actually better off being what he calls acratic, or having weakness of will.
So this is going to be time for our practice here.
Yeah.
So our practice this week is taking a pause, otherwise known as bracketing or epoche.
Yeah, in ancient Greek, epoche, literally pulling yourself back from something. And it's something that you find running throughout not just early Western philosophy and also medieval and modern philosophy. It's also found in a lot of non-Western philosophical and religious traditions as well. Think about the role it plays in Buddhism as well, right? Mm-hmm. And it's called by a lot of different names, but the basic idea is that instead of reacting immediately and automatically to things, you pause and you give yourself a moment and you say, are things actually the way that they appear to me or not? And a lot of people don't like to do this because they want to react right away. And
a lot of people don't even know that you can do it.
That's true. Yeah. And it's liberating to be able to do this because it means that you don't have to be driven by what the ancient Greeks would call appearances or impressions, things that impinge upon us. We often do react to things in a kind of automatic way. And I'll give an example. So, I'm looking at Twitter and I see somebody criticizing something that I like, or, praising something that I don't like. And I think, oh, I wish it had a dislike button so I could push that, 20 times. Okay, well, that's probably a stupid reaction. Right? That's actually not particularly helpful or rational. And if I take a pause, I can do a lot of different things within that pause. But one thing I'm not doing is automatically thinking or choosing or doing or saying something. And then in that pause, there's a lot of options. I can analyze why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. I can remind myself of something that I resolved to do differently. There's a lot of options, you could say.
I find this really interesting, especially there's I don't know if you call it a meme, sure it's a meme, of the my emotions are valid, which is totally like a correct statement, but to take the next step to my emotions are valid, so I don't need to analyze my emotions and I'm just going to follow where they go. I think is a poor next decision there. Yeah,
and it is a decision, right? And people conceal from themselves the fact that they are choosing it, that they're responsible for it.
So who can do this practice?
Well, anybody can. But like you were saying, a lot of people don't realize that they can. It's not easy to do in every situation, although the more you practice it, the better you get at it, right?
Yeah.
So
what is the best reason why to do this?
So short term, what you're doing is keeping yourself out of various types of trouble. And it could be actually keeping yourself from getting arrested,
right?
Ruining a relationship, getting
Should I
fired.
punch the cop? Maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. or flip them off,
Yeah.
That'll get you in a lot of trouble too sometimes, depending on who the cop is and what they're feeling that day. They might have an automatic response.
Right.
So short term, it helps to keep us out of trouble at a very baseline level, but it also offers us the opportunity to figure out what we're doing. And longer term, it's something that you need to do in order to be able to do other philosophical or what we sometimes call spiritual practices. If you don't have the self-control to be able to just stop and pause and figure out what's going on, well, you can't do, other things when you need to.
And another part of the long-term benefit is like at first it's very difficult. It takes a lot to say, okay, stop, evaluate, but the more and more that you do it, kind of like your idea of like you are what you repeatedly do. Once you get to the point where this has become your standard response to stop and evaluate, this allows such a beautiful way of interacting with the world instead of just kind of going along for the ride.
Yeah, it helps you see more of the world, right? And it helps you see more of not just yourself, but other people. If you pause, then the person who anger might have led you into automatically writing off, you can actually kind of like see who they are and where they're coming from and maybe be empathetic to them. You might still say, well, they're still wrong and I need to, avoid them or something like that. But now you have a good reason to do it. You're not just simply responding.
Yeah. And so when is this practice useful?
Ideally all the time,
right?
Although you wouldn't want to just be like doing, every single thing you automatically bracket it, because we have to live a life,
right?
And there are some things where you probably do want to like throw yourself in, right? And go along with the flow. If you're, romantically entangled with somebody in the throes of passion, I don't think you need to like pause and say, oh, what am I feeling right here? That might ruin the moment.
Well, it kind of depends. Are you already in a relationship with someone else? Do they know about this other relationship that you're starting off?
Those are other factors. but
like, I'm in the throes of passion. Maybe I should stop for a moment and reconsider.
I think if those are the sorts of questions that are occurring to you, you're probably right.
Or you probably also had a couple of other moments that you should have been evaluating earlier.
Before you got there. But I mean, it's something that when we get into, so like situations that we're in now, like we're in this big, messy pandemic situation that is causing a lot of fear and anxiety for people. And when they start feeling overcome by that, they can take that pause. They can say, okay, I don't have to react to my fear. I can just like feel the fear and like take a look at it and see what's triggering this for me and how much fear I'm feeling at this time. And then it could also be good for, so that's like, you call it a chronic thing. Then we could talk about it like acute instances, right? Where something happens and like, so let's say you're sitting next to somebody on the bus and suddenly they're coughing next to you and you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe it's useful then. You could say something that's happening in a lot of workplaces. Anybody coughs, anybody sneezes, everybody's worried. Right. So maybe you take a pause then and you remind yourself, okay, odds are they have allergies or they're sick or with something else. So that could be helpful. And you could also do it as a practice with things that are much more low stakes.
Yeah, like watching TV. You can go and watch, your choice of 24-hour news networks and listen to the talking heads.
Yeah, that could actually be a good practice because they're guaranteed to say something that you will react to, right?
Right. So practice on someone that you don't actually are actively interacting with.
Yeah, and you could actually do that in the places where you're stuck watching TV, like the doctor's office, right? Where somebody's got it cranked up real high and it's some, daytime show. Yeah, that would work. Well, it looks like it's time to start thinking about wrapping up. So, what? Any last thoughts?
Fear is a hell of a drug.
How so? That's an interesting one to go out on.
Yeah, just that in the idea that a drug changes one's perspective on the world.
Okay.
A lot of times, your perception has been altered to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And especially when there's mass fear, that it results in really outsized actions.
And people can become kind of addicted to it, you could say, right?
Okay. And I'm going. We're Guy. Have a good day. Bye.
Oh, did we run out of time?
Yeah, I thought we had.
Oh, we're out. We'll get better.